Thank you very much. Welcome to the Mobility and Millennials panel. I've with me a wonderful panel, which I'm quickly going to introduce. My name is Sebastian Peck. I'm the Managing Director of InMotion Ventures. We invest in the future of transport and mobility, and we make sure that JLR maintains relevance in a very disruptive environment. I've got with me on the left Dr. Matilda Anderson. She's the Head of Insight and Innovation at CrowdDNA, a cultural insight and innovation agency based in London, Amsterdam, and New York, where she works with brands like IKEA, Spotify, Facebook, and Heineken, form deeper connections with consumers. Next to her, Huyun Lim. She's a research designer and speculative designer. I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about that. Imagining possible future experiences by merging design, thinking, and technology. As a trained architect, she's building expertise in human-centered design through ethnography, strategic development, ideation, prototyping. She's currently an associate director at the MIT Design Lab and studies millennial behaviors through the Design Lab's International Behavioral Observatory project. Next to me, I've got Neil Sharp, who heads up the global team at Bosch, focusing on the development of new operating models for urban mobility. This includes utilizing the best of Bosch technology worldwide, as well as identifying, developing relationships with innovative partners. To my right, Alison Devine. She's a broadcaster and writer. Her TV career has seen her host a variety of shows across the major channels, including music programs such as the Brit Awards, the Barclaycard Mercury Prize, Isle of Wight Festival, and Glastonbury. The comedy podcast she created, My Dad Wrote a Porno, is an international smash hit, raking up more than 60 million downloads, with the live show selling out in the Sydney Opera in a matter of hours. We've also got Jim Chapman and Dan Howell, two YouTubers. Jim is hugely successful with more than 98 million views worldwide. He has become one of YouTube's most influential faces in fashion, tech, fitness, and entertainment. And Dan Howell, he rose to fame with his YouTube channel and is also a best-selling author, Radio 1 DJ, TV presenter, interview, and festival headliner. Many, many jobs there. Fantastic. We're going to start with a video that hopefully conveys a little bit what the millennials are about. I'm then going to ask you a question. You should have an app on your phone that allows you to vote on the question. And then we are going to start providing a little bit more color around what the millennials are all about. So if you can play the video, please.
So we've all heard of millennials. We think we've got a pretty good understanding of them, right?
Well, let's be clear. Millennials are a generation of many contradictions. Born roughly between 1982 and 1995, they have a reputation for being narcissistic, entitled, and tech-obsessed. Yet, they're civic-minded, liberal, and optimistic, despite coming of age in a global recession and faced with widespread unemployment. So how does this generation of contradictions look at mobility? There are a few questions. For a generation that wants to do things their way and on their own time, how are they meeting the traditional marks of adulthood, like having kids and owning a car? How will the blurring boundaries between home, work, and leisure spaces impact how they spend their time on the move? In the future, what will this I want it now smartphone generation demand from mobility services?
Very good. Let's ask the question to the audience. So please get out your smartphones. Has ownership reached the end of the road? And we're going to reveal the result at the end of the debate. I'd like to start off with Matilda and Huyun to give us a little bit more detail and context. And we've already heard there are a lot of contradictions that are often coming to the surface when people write and think about the millennials. For you, what are the standout characteristics of the millennial generation?
Sure. So the first thing to remember, I guess, is that, you know, especially if you work in marketing, you've done research, you think, I know millennials. We know millennials so well. But I would say be a bit careful, because they're a generation of many contradictions. Like you saw on the video, they are accused of being self-obsessed, entitled, glued to their mobile phones. Now that might be true, but at the same time, for a generation who's come of age during a global recession, and also now increasingly are forming their adult life in an increasingly polarized world, they're actually surprisingly optimistic and civic-minded. So there's lots of contradictions there. We also have to remember that there's a huge age gap. It's a big generation. So born between 1982 and 1995. So that's between the age where, you know, Michael Jackson released Thriller and the first iteration of eBay was launched. So the youngest are about 22, the oldest are about 35. So we're really starting to see how the different life stages are playing out there. And also, of course, the older millennials, they are not digital natives, but the youngest are. So there's lots of differences there. And then, of course, there's big differences between Western markets, Eastern markets, the global North, the global South, particularly when it comes to mobility and expectations or desires around ownership. So millennials are fascinating, and I'm looking forward to exploring them in more detail.
I agree with Matilda. It's a really wide generation, and also I think we're seeing a lot of the convergence in the trends across the global South, North, and East and West, and that's becoming less different from regions to regions, and that's because we're seeing data becoming more affordable and technology become more inclusive. So some of the trends that we observe here in the West and also in the North, you're starting to see the trends emerge in the South and then also especially the East too. For example, in India, you're seeing a lot of millennials sharing the similar trends that we see here. And so I think what we start to see is some of the cultural nuances that makes millennials maybe slightly different, but across the border, between these contradictions with the millennials, we're seeing some of the very large similarities happening.
Absolutely, I'd just like to agree with you on that point. I think something that unites millennials around the world is that, you know, they're all experiences global interconnectedness. There's the rate of change or speed of change in terms of technology that unites them.
Yeah. Alice, Jim, Dan, you are interacting with that generation on a daily basis. Do you sort of recognize yourself and the generation you engage with in that video? What are some of the things that you have picked up on that probably define you and give you a sense of identity? Is there a sense of identity that spans an entire generation?
I've taken an aerial picture of my lunch. Does that count?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
that
100%.
counts. Okay.
What was it, like self-obsessed lives with their mobile phone in their faces? I feel like it was a pretty balanced review of our generation.
And civic-mindedness and a liberal outlook.
In order, though.
I feel like millennial is a term that millennials don't use. That's definitely true. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's not something that somebody self-identifies as. But yeah, I think what Matilda said is really interesting, that if that's the definition we're using, if that's the range that we're talking about, 22 to 35 is a really difficult group to pinpoint in terms of common traits. That's really hard. But yeah, I definitely think there was some stuff in the video that I recognised as being, I recognised in myself, but also in the people that I broadcast to and that I'm talking to.
Totally. I didn't even know I was a millennial until I got this pack through and started reading through it. I thought I was...
How do you feel?
Younger.
Yeah, okay, good.
I thought, because I'm nearly 30, so I'm 29. I thought it was people, I figured it was just digital natives. I remember when the internet was awful. I get home from school and I try and send an email or like talk to my friends on MSN Messenger and you'd have to like plug it in. And Mum would be going, get off the internet, I'm on the phone. You'd have the beep, 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 beep noises, it all kind of wires up and everything. And it was a nightmare. So I spent most of my childhood on my skateboard, like breaking windows and causing mischief. So it is interesting to find out that I am actually one of these people because I didn't share my childhood with a lot of the newer ones. But yeah, I do see a lot of similarities in what was discussed in the video. I don't necessarily think we are self-obsessed. I think we are now, we have technology in our hands and, everyone lives in their own little bubble so we can share our lives. Certainly for me, it's not really, my content, for example, on my channel isn't really about me as such. It's about me talking about something or displaying something or discussing something, but just from my opinion. It's less about, hey, look how good my hair looks. Do you know what I mean? But
It does look great.
Thanks.
Just so you know.
Thanks very much. But yeah, I feel a bit younger now. Nice to know.
Yeah, it's funny because it spans such a wide range of people that were kind of, I think the millennial generation is people that were kind of there for the formation of the internet and saw it slowly, become the definition of our modern society. And I think that definitely towards the younger end of it, that's when you start to see these trends of people that they just see like mobility just as a function. They just want services now. It's just a completely different way of living where people, you've got Uber, you've got delivery, you've got all of these things, any service that can be provided. Like, people just want to find that next way to make their life more efficient as instantly as possible. And I think that's what's going to define the generation in terms of what people have to provide.
So you talked about wanting something and wanting it now and that sort of, instant gratification. How important is being able to relate emotionally to what you are getting, the service you are buying? Is it just a utility? Is it just a means to an end? Or is it something more?
For me, it depends on what it is. If it's Uber, for example, if I've got to get somewhere, I do Uber X because it's cheaper, and I'm not that bothered. But the car I drive is super cool and super sexy because that's something that I really care about. So, if it's just a means to an end, then I'm not that bothered. But if it's something that I actually care about, so for example, for food, if I do Deliveroo, if I'm in a rush, I'll just do whatever's quick. But, if I've got more time on my hands, I'm going to order something nice and tasty and take my time. So I think it's kind of horses for courses in that sense. I do feel like the more you invest in something, more important it is to your existence, the more you are going to invest in it. The more you're going to want something a bit sexier, a bit nicer.
Maybe that's about the ephemeral nature of it too. Like your Uber ride is 15 minutes in your car
Totally.
you have on your drive.
Yeah.
Well, knowing you, Jim, up to 6 weeks before you change it. So yeah, maybe it's that kind of the nature of how long you're spending with it.
If you think about the sort of point raised about civic mindedness, do you worry or think about the social consequences of the on-demand economy?
I think definitely when you look at brands and relationships, the social consciousness aspect of it is incredibly important to young people these days. Any brand or service that gets a bad reputation for doing something wrong can just get completely shunned by the whole younger generation that really care about, being or definitely appearing to be as ethical as possible. So I think that, especially as Jim was saying, when it comes to owning something and caring about something, any kind of brand, they have to be seen as someone that has like a good reputation. And if you want to form your own personal relationship with it, then it kind of has to have that good vibe that they've been nourishing.
And I think that comes a lot from recommendations that are personal as well, rather than being perhaps like a wider recommendation. We were talking briefly before we came on about the importance of like kind of that seal of approval from your peers. And definitely in a broadcasting sense, people are evangelical about stuff that they love within their network, and that's a really strong influence. And just looking at, radio and TV, yes, but podcasting as a newer iteration of broadcasting, that seems to spread through that network of recommendations within your close connections, and I think that's true for products too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. For us at Bosch, we we're focused on how mobility occurs within cities, and obviously civic mindedness is just, is part of that whole process. And for us, there's a large question that we try and answer on a daily basis to say, just because we can do something, does that mean we should? What is the impact of that ethically? How will that impact the city? How is this going to play out? And for me, I think, the increased trend around connectivity, we're in a fantastic moment right now. I said earlier to Alice, I think, I wish I was around in 100 years' time, to see where this goes. But, we're at a time where we can really shape the future right now, but we could also make some really big missteps. And for me, we're in an era of personalization. So I think what you guys are talking about, you take your world around with you, you're personalizing everything. Transportation and mobility is becoming personalized. More options, on demand, everything.
That is really the debate also about access versus ownership, right? And I'd be quite interested. In my day, owning a car, or getting a car was a rite of passage. It sort of marked, you becoming an adult. And it was also, a means of freedom that you just wouldn't have if you still relied on someone else to ferry you around. What does car ownership mean to you personally?
I need to out myself as I can't drive. I don't know if I don't know if there's like a red dot on my head now and they just like take me out.
You can take me as well.
Oh, really?
Wow.
I do still see it as that kind of marker. I still see it as very grown up. I still see it as a kind of indicator of kind of where you are in your life, and I'm clearly not there yet because I can't even drive one.
I think it's as much to do with geography, though. You're a Londoner, right?
Yeah.
So I'm from Norwich, and if I didn't learn to drive, I would have lived in my house and never made any friends. So I had to learn to drive so I could get around. When I moved to London, I didn't bring my car for the first year. And now I live in London, I have my car, and I only drive it when I know I'm going to be able to park, or if I'm going outside of London and I know I need to be able to drive somewhere. If I'm going sort of to and from the office within London, there's no point in me taking my car because I'm going to have to park it. I have to park it miles from where I'm going to end up because I'm never going to find a spot. It's a nightmare because there's traffic everywhere. So, I'll get the tube or I'll get an Uber or something. But if I'm leaving London or kind of on the rim or, going somewhere I know there's going to be like ample parking, then I love driving. But I think it's as much to do with geography than it is about, the age you are. If it's not a necessity for you, then you don't need to.
I think that's definitely why, because when I was 17, for me, it was absolutely a coming-of-age thing. It meant freedom, because I was in Reading, but I was, you don't want your mum to drive you to someone's house party on a week. That's just mortifying. It's like, as soon as you can learn to drive, it's like, I have to do this. I have to actually take control of my own life. But just like these guys were saying, I went to university. My parents sold my car while I was at university without telling me. So that was my experience. I found out that my car was being sold because a friend tagged me in a photo of it outside my house with a for sale sign in the window. So that's technology ruining lives. But then ever since I moved to London, I just haven't needed to use a car. Unlike Jim, I never go outside generally. So I don't find a use for a car because I don't go out into the country. But I had that joy of driving. I loved it. It wasn't just a function when I was a teenager learning to drive. Like, I loved driving. But now that, for me, it's just a function. I'm like, okay, I'll get the tube, I'll order a My Taxi, I'll get in an Uber.
And did you love it because that was your space?
I loved it because it was my space. I liked listening to music, I liked driving. It's like me and my friends, we'd go on trips. And I think that, like, the millennial generation, there is this practical geography thing of, like, you only drive when you need it. You might not have to ever. If there's a service, you can do it. But I think that we still value adventure and experiences and joy as much as the other generations. So I don't think it's going to completely go, because people still want to be able to have that freedom to kind of go out with their friends and do what they want. And that's something you need your own car for.
It's so wonderful, actually, to hear you talk, because it chimes with a lot of the things that we see in research about millennials and mobility. And I think what you say is, owning a car is about, convenience, but it's also about that feeling of freedom. But of course, if you can get that from somewhere else, if you can get convenience by using taxi apps, public transport is getting better. One of my colleagues is moving using a SIP car this weekend, is millennial. If something can replace the car in being convenient, then perhaps you don't need to own a car. But I think then another point is what you touched on as well, is that millennials actually live in smaller spaces because of, urbanization, but also, lack of home ownership, so living with friends or living with parents. So the car can almost become a third space, or a place where you can have some privacy, listen to music, but also a personalized space where you can have, your colors, your things, getting from, one space to the other. And actually, I'm interviewing quite a lot of millennials and Gen Z lately. So we go to their houses, or they send us videos when we're asking them about research questions. And quite often they take us to their family car or their own car, and we do the interview in the car, or they send video, kind of James Corden carpool karaoke style in the car. And I've realized that it's because it's a private space. It's a space where you can relax, where you can hang out with friends. And I think if millennials feel like the car really allows them to do what they want, and it gives kind of maybe a productive space, or a space where you can hang out, then ownership becomes interesting again.
It's very much the case for me. I love driving on my own. In fact, if my wife's in the car, I'm often like, have a nap, love. So I just want her to go to sleep so I can actually just be in my own space, because I use it as my thinking time. I have my music on. And I just like being on just a long road. I really enjoy it. And I do like to, sometimes when I'm going back home to see my mum back in Norwich, and my wife, Tan, doesn't want to come, I'm like, oh, awful. Because I actually just really like my own space. And the car is the only time I get that. When I'm at home, I've got work kind of running at me. I've got the dog, I've got my wife. So much going on. In the car, I can't use my phone. I can't write an email. So all I can do is sort of listen to a podcast or listen to music, and it's just me, and it's bliss.
And it's, I think, similar experience on my side. I mean, I'm at the very back end of the millennial generation, and I've got two very young daughters who are just awesome. But their first mode of connecting with technology is voice. So, we've got Alexa at home and all this stuff, and the first thing they'll come down and do is say, Alexa, how's the weather, and things like that, and they're 5. 5 and 4, it's kind of, okay, wow. Yeah, that's how they're engaging. I think where we're going to see things shift in terms of the vehicle environment, is that demand, that kind of connection where you can kind of ask for things and you get it. I think that's where we're going to see it go. But in terms of ownership, I mean, I don't know where we'd be without a car. Living on that rural edge just outside of London, we're having to ferry them backwards and forwards to various activities. It's almost it's a necessity. Yeah, okay, it's a hybrid electric, but it's a necessity.
But this is actually a millennial point as well, because of urbanization, people moving into cities, the urban spaces are becoming bigger, the suburban areas are becoming bigger, and a lot of millennials are, because of house prices, forced to buy or live further out. And then, as you say, transport is really important.
So I think it really boils down to desire versus need. So why do you need a car? And right now, your needs can be fulfilled with all these services like Uber, Lyft, and all these car services that you can call on demand and they come right away. But also then, why would you want to own a car? It's really about the desire. So desire for personal space, desire for mobility, for freedom. So then the question is, then how do you drive that desire? And those would come from the experiences of what the automobile can provide. And as we move more towards an autonomous car, the era of autonomous cars, then we really have to think about what kind of experiences that you can provide within that car space. And back to Uber, I think what we're also seeing is Uber is trying to become more of an experience rather than a functional thing. So we're seeing Uber providing like a 50-minute drive with a potential VC. That's happening in Boston. So during some times, you can book a time with a mentor, with someone who's coming into town from different parts of the world, so you can have that 15 minutes of personal face-to-face conversation in that space.
Yeah, that's really interesting because a couple of months ago I was in our office in Palo Alto and I took an Uber. I mean, I'm app native. If Uber was in my area where I live, which it's not, it's very rural, I'd use Uber. But in Palo Alto, yeah, I grabbed an Uber X just to get from A to B. And the guy driving it was actually a partner in a venture capital firm. And he was doing it, and literally, this is
to meet people,
yeah,
to meet and talk to people.
No, actually listen to conversations in the car. So he said, look, I love this because I get to meet so many different people and hear what's going on in the valley. I just thought that was fascinating how they've taken that service and kind of moved it onto something else. And I think that again ties into the millennial culture. Yeah.
I quickly would like to touch on a concept that I came across in your research, and then open it up about luxury evolved. So how does this generation think about luxury consumption? Is it a materialistic generation, or does that not matter?
Yeah, I think that's a really relevant question when it comes to millennials. Actually, I think it's almost like a big divider in terms of what is luxury, what is status, and millennials are definitely at the kind of driving seat of changing concepts of luxury. I think it influences the other generations as well, but I mean, luxury is always about scarcity. So having a very exclusive experience, invitation only, that is luxury. But then millennials are also time poor. So they sleep less than other generations. They have less sex than the older generations. So actually, sleep is luxury. It's also, there's lots of mental health issues, so personal growth and kind of nurturing both the physical and the mental health, and we can see that with all those mental health apps. So kind of holistic health is luxury. And I can see, kind of mobility or third spaces can help with that.
I think that mental infrastructure is something that's vastly underplayed at the minute in terms of how technology is engaging. But bringing it back to luxury, I mean, my wife's a fashion designer, so this is really important to her. She's kind of, wow, things are changing so quick. How do we engage? But I was in New York a few weeks ago with her, and it was one of the Yeezy launches, and we were staying in Soho, and walked around the corner, and there's people queuing around the block for the whole day, if not night, waiting to pick up these personalised trainers, the Yeezy trainers, which I've tried multiple times and failed. But that shows you, it's price point driven, it's value driven, but also that kind of brand piece is still very important. It's a millennial crowd.
I think, Jim, this is probably an area you know quite a bit about.
Yeah, for me, when I think of luxury, I think of heritage, which maybe is slightly different to the view from a lot of other people. But I like to think of whatever I invest in has a history of doing what they do really well. So that's why I drive a Jaguar, because they've been doing it for a long time, and they're some of the first racing cars around, and they're bloody amazing. That's why I wear Savile Row sometimes, because they've been doing it for a long time. And I try to do that not in just. I try to do it quite consciously. One, because I like to support the brands that have been doing it a long time and have the expertise. But also, I do feel like it says something about me, like I have sort of a thoughtful approach. I could go and buy a suit from anywhere, but I like to go there because it shows that I kind of know what I'm doing. And for me, it's less about necessarily the image it shows. It's more the fact that it shows that I like to invest and I think about what I do.
I think heritage is one of the keywords. So heritage, small batch, crafted, one of a kind, authentic. All these are timeless. All of these are the keywords that can start to describe what luxury means to millennials, and making that transparent, making that information so when you buy a product, you get to see every person that's involved in that every stage of the process of making, and seeing whose hand got into that making process, and seeing that through, we see that companies now use like blockchain technology and other ways of visualizing that info more available to the users. I think that's what communicates what luxury is to millennials.
Yeah, it's funny because I think the generation is less about spending money for the sake of it. So if there was a brand that didn't have much of a story, but it just said, hey, I've splashed loads of cash, that's not value anymore. Value is having a story. It's being able to, choose something for a reason because it has history, but it's also being able to define yourself by showing others what you've chosen. And I think that's a big part of it. So any kind of product, it has to have its own identity, and it has to have a story, because when people choose something, they choose it because it's a reflection of themselves. Like my grandma had an E-Type, so I feel like I have a personal relationship with Jaguar going back, and that's not something, so I don't have that emotional connection with these other brands. So I think there's definitely an aspect of history that's quite important to people.
And I think talking about brands, actually, there is a perception that millennials don't care about brands, that brand loyalty has gone down. It's not true. They do care about brands more than other generations, but I guess the relationship to brands has changed. So maybe loyalty is down, but brand passion is up. And we spoke about that before, where you have a brand and you feel that the values of that brand are aligning with your own. that's when you have this feeling of that it tells a story about you.
I've got a question for Alice, really around collective experiences and how brands can be part of those collective experiences and can reach people. When I think about Land Rover, maybe Glastonbury, is there something there? So how do I have to think about this?
Well, yeah, I think perhaps there's maybe a misunderstanding about millennials not wanting those collective experiences in the same way that people used to. So we were talking briefly earlier about that idea of the appointment to view or the appointment to listen, and that idea that you're all in the living room and you're all around the TV, watching your family's favourite soap on a Tuesday night. I don't think that does happen in that same way, but I think that happens online. So I think people do still want to engage with those collective things, be it Glastonbury. If you're not there, you want to be engaging in the conversation, you want to be catching up and watching all of that content. If you are there, you're providing that content and feeding that conversation and posting those things on socials. And we see it with the show that we do, which is a podcast, in that people aren't obviously listening at the same time, because that's the beauty of that kind of show, that you can listen on your commute, or maybe you're somebody that listens to it as you go to sleep, whatever your preference. But people then want to talk about it, and people then want to kind of dissect it as a community. And where brands come in, I mean, we partner with brands on the podcast. There's lots of brands that are involved at Glastonbury. I think the kind of joke about millennials, or maybe the cliche, is that you have your artisan coffee in the morning, and all the words that you were just talking about then, authenticity. But I think there is a focus on provenance, and I think that is saying, does this brand belong here, or have they just seen an opportunity? And that might be a kind of the way that it's dressed, that might not go much deeper. Sometimes brands do just jump in at the last minute, and it is a kind of a perfect marriage. But I think there is that idea that you have to feel like they fit together somehow, and you can't. Is there an idea of like feeling like you're being duped if?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see it a lot of times. People kind of like jump in, like Pepsi and was it Kendall Jenner thing, where it was like, oh, I'll solve this issue on race with some Pepsi. And it's like, oh no, it's like you have to be really careful, and it has to seem authentic and genuine, and that people can really pick up on it. So you have to tread carefully.
So when you talk about authenticity, what is authentic? How would you recommend brands engage with you?
I think that it has to be transparent. I think that history helps, because it's good to see. And as you were saying, like, people like to see the process of how something's been made. If something is like, hey, we're opening up about how this is made, here's the people that have done it, here's what we're trying to do, then it's like, okay, they're being honest, I like it, I can see it. Whereas if something's a bit distant and they're talking, if they use the word millennials, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, this isn't for me. Exactly.
I think also if you feel like both parties like one another in some way, does the brand that's going to Glastonbury, do they like Glastonbury? Do they want to be part of that event and part of that community? Does the brand that comes on board with our podcast, do they listen to our podcast? Do we feel like they want to be part of what we've built? And I think that has to go both ways too. Do we sound like we, do we sleep on a Lisa mattress, or whatever it is that we're, talking about? I think you need to feel like there is some kind of relationship there, and they're not just two parties in the same space.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the way I term it maybe is a little bit like evangelism. In the sense of if there's that authenticity and they really believe in it, that kind of group of people will really champion it, and they'll put it out there and socially an awful lot. Saw that with EVs. I mean, I previously was involved in electric vehicle charging, which is a tremendously boring subject. Putting infrastructure in the ground in London and Amsterdam. No. For hours, I'll do that, yeah. But the thing we saw with these early adopters was real evangelism. They cared. They're buying EVs, they cared. They wanted it to happen, they wanted to change the world. And if you cross that path, or they didn't feel like you were aligned, they'd let you know about it, and they'd let you know about it socially. And that's really clear.
Very good. I've been given the sign. I think we are now going to reveal the results of the question we asked at the beginning. If we can quickly get that up the screen.
Yeah.
No.
Here's hoping.
Are you surprised by that result?
I don't think it's reached the end of the road, and it's at least not yet. I think that geographically, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a long time until it's fully automated everywhere all over the world for a long time. I think that, you know, in urbanized first world countries and things, we're going to see the future changing, but I don't think it's the end of the road for a very long time.
Very good.
I think ownership is gonna change. So, you know, millennials are delaying adulthood. Their friends are becoming their family. You know, how can you share a car in easier ways? You know, it might not be personal ownership, but some form of ownership. So
Co-ownership.
Co-ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the audience.